Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be another fun one. This is the Second Schleswig War, German Wars of Unification. I'm glad you're here with me. Make sure you hit that like button if you love history. We're going to have a fun time today. The Danes, the Germans, not technically the Germans yet, but the Germanic people. I'm not sure what this battle is going to utilize, whether it be the Austrians or the Prussians or a different force from the German Confederation. We'll have to see. Glad you're here with me. Let's just go ahead and jump into it, shall we?
In April of 1864, amidst the stronghold of Dybbøl, thousands of Danish soldiers sought refuge in their meager redoubts made of wood. For 2 long weeks, they had endured constant shelling from the Prussian army. The unrelenting assault had taken its toll, causing many of the soldiers to suffer from impaired hearing and sight, and their lungs filled with the suffocating smoke and ash. The once thriving villages and towns surrounding the area had been reduced to rubble, consumed by the raging inferno. On the early morning of April 18th, the Danish vanguard stationed at the front lines sent an urgent report to their commanders. The Prussians were gathering.
I love how they have like music, like a little band happening right there.
In their trenches, positioned directly in front of the Danish redoubts. The pickets observed their enemy, suspecting they were repairing damages or widening the trenches. However, what caught their attention was the unusual movement of an entire military orchestra to the front line, leaving them perplexed and intrigued. At precisely 10 a.m., the deafening sound of shelling came to a halt. In a sudden and resounding battle cry, an overwhelming force of 10,000 Prussian soldiers charged.
Oh, they were in trenches. That's crazy.
Forth from their trenches. The outnumbered and battered Danish position stood no chance against this brutal onslaught. And thus, the infamous Battle of Dybbøl commenced. A fierce battle that would forever remain etched in the collective memory of the Danish people. This was the decisive turning point in the Second Schleswig War, a conflict that would have far-reaching consequences for both Denmark and Prussia.
Okay.
Experience the ultimate vehicle combat game K-Cross Ladders Buffalo's bonus A for Gen Cons. Prussia's historical development shows that it is destined to lead Germany. Crown Prince Wilhelm I, April 1851.
Because, the two big powers are either Austria or Prussia within the German Confederation. That's just how it's going to be. That's how it's perceived. One or the other.
In early February, the Austrian Empire and the Prussian Kingdom launched a joint invasion of the Danish Kingdom, following a dispute over the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. The Battle of Misunda saw a small Danish garrison manage to push back a much larger Prussian army, whereas at Königshügel, an Austrian force was able to defeat their Danish opponents.
Yeah, the Königshügel. I mean, technically the other one wasn't really a loss by the Prussians. They just didn't want to incur any more losses that they already had. However, it was more of a draw. But Königshügel, that was a lot of casualties comparatively.
Despite appearing to work in harmony, the Austrian and Prussian military spent much of their time sizing each other up, rather than focusing on their common enemy, the Danes.
Weird, man.
In the years leading up to the conflict, both powers had invested heavily in their armies at great economic and moral cost. The Austrian approach was to build a quality army of long-serving conscripts, aimed at securing quick victories through shock tactics. Meanwhile, the Prussians relied on a mass army of short-serving conscripts with theoretical preparation to make up for their lack of operational experience. Initially, the Prussian performance was underwhelming, largely due to the appointment of Count Friedrich von Wrangel as overall commander of the Allied forces. Wrangel's age, lack of combat experience, and mediocre abilities as a general made him an unsuitable choice for the role. His combat experience had been gained in conflicts against civilian insurgents during the revolutions of 1848. Following the Austrian victory at Königshügel, Wrangel was so impressed that he embraced and kissed the Austrian commander on the cheeks, much to the embarrassment of his Prussian colleagues. While Wrangel struggled to lead the Allied forces effectively, the Austrian units displayed great courage and skill. The Austrian brigade Nostitz managed to break through heavily defended Danish fortifications at Sankelmark, while a Prussian Guards division on their flank appeared almost inert. Such setbacks were frustrating for an army that had not seen warfare for half a century and desperately needed to prove its worth, both to the international community and the domestic population following the political struggle over military reform.
A lot in the balance.
Talk little, do much, and be more than you appear to be. Helmuth Graf von Moltke, Chief of Staff of the Prussian Army.
Everyone had just big old mustaches back then.
The Danish army found themselves in a dire situation. They were vastly outnumbered and under-equipped, but had been relying on the strength of their navy, including the ironclad Rolf Krake, to deter the invaders. However, an unusually cold winter froze the waters, rendering their naval vessels useless.
Pretty much.
The situation was bleak, and it only worsened after the initial battles. On the night of February 5th, the Danish commander-in-chief, Lieutenant General Christian Julius de Meza, made the difficult decision to abandon the Dannevirke to avoid being surrounded by the enemy. He withdrew his army to Flensburg, but could only evacuate what men and horses could carry or pull by road. The rest, including heavy artillery, had to be left behind. After
Oh, that usually would be captured, by the way, obviously.
Covering the retreat, the Prussian and Austrian forces pursued the Danish army. Historians have debated the impact and faults made during the retreat. De Meza was fired and put on trial for his tactically successful but politically unpopular decision. General Gerlach was appointed as de Meza's replacement, but he was reluctant to take charge. With only 20,000 soldiers left in the army, he established the main defensive line around the small town of Dybbøl. The Danish War was the first Prussian armed conflict in which a civilian politician exercised control. Bismarck, the skilled politician, ensured that the evolution of the conflict served the objectives of his diplomacy. He prevented the Prussian forces from pursuing the Danish army into Jutland.
This is the first time we've really heard Bismarck. I mean, we kind of heard him in the background, but really, like, in terms of being assertive.
During the early weeks of the war, reassuring the great powers that the joint campaign was not aimed at the territorial integrity of the Danish kingdom. Despite Bismarck's efforts, there were still slip-ups. In mid-February, Wrangel sent an advanced detachment of guards north of the Jutland border without permission. Bismarck was quick to intervene and relieve Wrangel of his command, recognizing the need for a victory. In early March, Bismarck urged the Austrians to invade Denmark proper. The Danes, who had been fighting hard despite being outnumbered and outgunned, were pushed back even further after the Battle of Dybbøl. They retreated to Fredericia before being relentlessly pushed onto the island of Fyn. By late March, an agreement was signed between Austria and Prussia, nullifying the 1852 agreement. Bismarck was always maneuvering, always looking for ways to consolidate power and expand Prussia's influence. In April, he made the bold decision to order the Prussian forces to attack the heavily fortified and manned fortifications at Dybbøl. The decision to attack was not without controversy. The commanders were hesitant, recognizing the risks and potential casualties that such a frontal assault would entail. However, Bismarck's will prevailed. It was a high-stakes gamble, but Bismarck was confident that it would pay off.
Here we go.
Is it supposed to be a political necessity to take the bulwarks? It will cost a lot of men and money. I don't see the military necessity.
What's the bulwarks? Is that like a geographical area? I'm not sure.
Prince Frederick Charles, the commander of the siege. On the 7th of February, the Danish army, consisting of 20,000 soldiers, 500 cavalry, 80 artillery pieces, and 1,100 artillery crewmen arrived at Dybbøl. Soon after, a Prussian army commanded by Frederick Charles arrived with around 20,000 soldiers, 1,200 cavalry, and 88 guns.
That's formidable.
The following month saw a stalemate with sporadic bombardment, causing significant damage to the villages of Reggebøl and Dybbøl. The Prussians slowly advanced, digging trenches inch by inch toward the Danish positions. Despite this, the Danes held a significant advantage due to their unchallenged command of the sea, and they were able to deploy the modern ironclad Rolf Krak to the area to support ground forces at Dybbøl with shore bombardments. The Prussians set up batteries throughout the month, including some on the flank of the Broager Peninsula. As the Prussian bombardment of the Dybbøl position continued, it became increasingly clear that the Danish defense was ill-equipped and ill-prepared. The redoubts, which had been hastily constructed with wooden block houses instead of concrete, provided little protection for the defending soldiers. Most of the crew had to be withdrawn far behind the line due to the attrition caused by the bombardment and the lack of effective shelters. The situation was made worse by the fact that the majority of Sonderborg caught fire during these weeks. Despite being fully aware
I wonder if that's from artillery or what.
of the inadequacy of his forces and equipment, General Gerlach was denied permission to retreat by the Minister of Defense in Copenhagen. Prime Minister Monrad reportedly ordered that the Danish army should not give an inch, no matter the cost.
Big talk! Big talk!
As the Prussian shelling intensified on the 11th of April, with 4,000 shells raining down on the Danish fortifications, the Prussians began making preparations for the capture of the entrenchments. They slowly crept up towards the Danish positions, readying themselves for the final assault. As night fell on April 17th, a total of 4,209 Danish soldiers manned the front line, while a
Versus 20,000 sieging?
reserve force of 5,524 stood ready. Major General Claude de Platte was in charge of the redoubts, with specific commanders assigned to each one. Lieutenant Colonel Falkenskjold commanded redoubts 1 and 2, Lieutenant Colonel Dreyer commanded redoubts 3 to 6, Colonel Andreas Bernstorff commanded redoubts 7 to 9, and Major Wohl was in charge of redoubt 10. Lieutenant General Peter Steinmann commanded the reserve force, which consisted of the 9th, 20th, 3rd and 18th regiments of the 8th and 2nd brigades.
There's still 2 to 1 odds on this, right?
The reserve force at the barracks was directly commanded by Colonel Scharfenberg and Kaufmann. In addition to the 9,733 infantrymen, the 7th Brigade and 2 batteries were tasked with defending Alts. At 4 in the morning on April 18th, the Prussians began their fiercest bombardment of the Dybbøl position yet, unleashing almost 8,000 shells in just 6 hours. As the Prussians moved into position, Danish observation posts reported on the frenzied activity, assuming that work teams were repairing damage or expanding the German positions. However, they were astonished to see a full military orchestra, led by the military composer Gottfried Pefke, taking up positions with the soldiers near the front. They were playing the newly composed Dybbøler Schanzensturmmarsch, a march that Pefke had written specifically for the occasion.
Dang! That's freaking crazy. A lot of people make songs nowadays from movies or TV shows. Back then, you made a song for a battle.
At 10 a.m. on April 18th, the bombardment abruptly ceased. From atop Avenbjerg, Frederick Charles signaled the start of the attack. 10,000 Prussian infantry, well-trained and well-armed, began their assault on the Danish redoubts. Divided into 6 columns, they stormed towards redoubts 1 to 6, which were manned by 2,200 Danish soldiers. Despite shelling from Rolf Krak, the Prussian soldiers advanced steadily. The Danish defenders responded with scattered rifle fire, and although accounts from survivors indicate that they put up a strong fight, they were ultimately outmaneuvered, outnumbered and outgunned. Within a matter of minutes, the southern trenches were
They're already way in their backfield.
overrun and conquered. Even in
No, those are the retreaters. But yeah, they are. They're chasing them.
Redoubt 4, where close combat was fought with bayonets, the Danes were unable to hold out against the Prussian advance. Despite their victory, many of the Prussian troops continued to push forward towards the bridgehead, instead of consolidating their position in the captured redoubts. This resulted in a loss of control for the Prussian officers. The Danish redoubts 7 to 10 were still holding on, despite being on the brink of collapse. From behind their battered defenses, the Danes offered fierce resistance and subjected the Prussians to heavy fire as they climbed the slopes towards the entrenchments. As the battle raged on, it became clear to the Danish commanders that they were facing a serious threat. They realized that this was no mere skirmish but a full-scale attack. At approximately 10:30 a.m., General Duplat ordered a counterattack with the 8th Brigade, a force of about 3,000 soldiers. They charged onto the battlefield, swiftly pushing back scattered Prussian detachments and serving as a protective screen for the defenders of redoubts 7 to 10. However, as the counterattack approached the rear trenches and the burning Dybbøl Molle, it came to a halt. The Prussian officers had successfully organized the defense of the capital.
Look how much is in the pipe right now coming towards them. Like that pipeline of Prussians just encroaching on the fortifications. Just wild to me. There's no chance the Danes have here.
Captured redoubts and used them to repel the Danish attacks. The losses suffered by the 8th Brigade were severe and gaps began to appear in its line. One particularly dangerous gap emerged between the brigade's 2 regiments, just south of Dybbøl Molle. Meanwhile, on the Prussian side, Frederick had dispatched around 10,000 reserves to reinforce the front lines. By 11:15 a.m., a 10,000-strong contingent had arrived at the redoubts.
It's over, man.
Some of the Prussian reserves moved precisely into the gap between the 2 Danish regiments, threatening to outflank them. The 8th Brigade was forced to withdraw to the bridgehead at Alsund, with casualties totaling 1,399 men, which was almost half of their total strength. The counterattack, led by General Duplat's 8th Brigade, proved to be a turning point in the battle. Thanks to their efforts, the remaining soldiers of the 1st and 3rd Brigades were able to escape to the pier opposite Sonderburg.
I guess this would win.
However, by 13:30, the last resistance at the bridgehead in front of Sonderburg had collapsed, and the Prussians emerged victorious.
Oh, that was easy.
The defeated Danish forces were forced to retreat to the island of Als. Following the battle, conflicting reports emerged regarding the number of casualties. Some sources claimed that around 3,600 Danes and 1,200 Prussians were either killed, wounded, or missing. However, a Danish official army casualty list indicated that 671 Danes were killed, 987 were wounded, 473 of whom were captured, and 3,131 were unwounded and either captured or had deserted, making for a total of 4,789 casualties. The 2nd and 22nd regiments suffered the most losses. In addition, the crew of the Danish naval ship Rolf Krak reported 1 dead and 10 wounded. Meanwhile, the Prussians suffered 1,201 casualties, including 263 deaths. One week after the battle at Dybbøl, the Danish army found themselves under siege by the Austrians at Fredericia and were forced to abandon the city. On the very same day, the London Conference commenced, where the parties involved would spend the following months discussing the ongoing conflict and attempting to negotiate peace. A temporary ceasefire was arranged at the conference, during which Bismarck offered the Danes the northern part of Schleswig, which had a predominantly Danish population. Unfortunately, despite the Danes suffering significant defeats, their government remained obstinate and unwilling to accept the favorable terms.
Stubborn.
Desperate to save their country, King Christian secretly petitioned Bismarck multiple times to allow Denmark.
And I will say, we'll play caveat, we'll play devil's advocate. They are fighting for the country, so we shall never surrender. To be, they might believe they have. We know what happened, but like they might really believe that they have a shot.
To keep Schleswig and Holstein, with the condition of joining the German Confederation and becoming part of the larger German Empire. However, Bismarck refused the offer, not wishing to acquire a large, discontented minority population on his northern border. The ceasefire ended in late June, and the Prussians launched a successful amphibious attack on the island of Olsen, delivering the final blow to Denmark's hopes of victory. By that same week, Austria and Prussia had agreed to revise their objectives. They aimed to separate the duchies entirely from Denmark in case of victory. By late July, the Austrians and Prussians had conquered all of Jutland and claimed Schleswig and Holstein in their entirety.
Wow.
The Danish government had no choice but to initiate peace negotiations, as their islands were in danger of falling as well. On August 1st, 1864, King Christian of Denmark conceded all rights to the duchies to Prussia and Austria, subjecting them to a joint military occupation. The future of the duchies would be determined by the German Confederation. The Treaty of Vienna, formalizing the ceding of the duchies, was signed in late October. The consequence of this was that Denmark lost 40% of its territory and population, equating to approximately 1 million inhabitants. Denmark's future
A lot of taxation
appeared uncertain, and its survival was in jeopardy. The situation seemed to suggest the beginning of an era of harmonious dual hegemony, with cooperation between the two major German powers. The Austrians sought this outcome, and Bismarck encouraged their hopes. The victories by the Prussians had finally silenced the liberal opposition to military spending and reform, resulting in a domestic victory for the Chancellor and the King. Following the ceding of the duchies to Austria and Prussia, negotiations were held to determine the administration of the newly acquired territories. It was agreed that Prussia would govern Schleswig, while Austria would oversee Holstein. As part of the deal, Austria would relinquish Saxe-Lauenburg, which would be ruled by the Prussian king in a personal union for a sum of 2.5 million Danish rigsdalers. However, the joint rule of the two great powers over the duchies soon became a source of conflict.
Of course.
Bismarck saw this as an opportunity to provoke Austria to war, using disputes over the administration of the duchies as a pretext. The ensuing war, known as the Bruderkrieg, or War of Brothers, would have significant consequences for Germany and the future of Europe. Play War Thunder for free.
Guys, the Schleswig-Holstein Second War is over. We have Prussia and Austria co-managing both Holstein and Schleswig. Schleswig to Prussia, Holstein to Austria. This is going to be the pretext of the Austro-Prussian wars. I'm sure this is where Bismarck really starts to shine. Unification of Germany is kindling right now. Denmark has lost 40% of their territory. Europe is insane right now. We got about 8 more videos of the German wars of unification. It's just, I believe from here on out, it's the Austro-Prussian War. So don't know anything about that. So I'm excited to learn. Guys, I'm excited for you to be alongside me as we kind of, delve through those videos. So please hit that subscribe button as we can watch more together. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye.